Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for jumping on this webinar with the University of Texas School of Public Health and the Houston Area Safety Council. Very excited to have everybody on here. This is part one of a 7-part series on opening Texas the right way. Today, we're going to be talking about our retail industry, an industry that is so vital to the economy of Texas. So we've got some really good subject matter experts in this field and on this topic. So we're very excited to have them. We thank them for being a part of this webinar today, and we're going to introduce those individuals in a few minutes. But I want to highlight that as much as possible, this is not a lecture series. So we're going to show some hot topic slides up front just to kind of give everybody a snapshot of what's going on, how we are doing in Texas as far as this COVID virus, and then dive into the retail industry specifically today. You know, what is everybody doing to make sure that we can open safely? What are we doing in the retail industry to make sure that our customers that are coming into these locations are being treated in the most proper, safe, hygienic way possible, and then to give retailers some information on what they can do to meet those standards and criteria. So please feel free to type in questions along the way. In the question box, you should see a question box in there, and feel free to just type out as many questions as you can. We're going to be looking at those throughout and really try to answer as many of them as we can, if not all of them. So again, I'm not going to try to lecture too much today, just going to give you some hot topics, some hot answers, and then answer your questions. If you can see our screen, our slideshow that's running there in the background, we've got two major entities that are putting this webinar series together. The first is the Houston Area Safety Council, which I'm part of. Our mission is to build safe workplaces. So anything that we can do to educate and to train and build a safe workplace, that's what we are here to do. And we have a great partnership and collaborative effort with the UT School of Public Health. And their mission is to change the culture of health through excellence in graduate education, research, and engagement. So it's a good natural fit for both of these entities to get together and to help provide as many resources and knowledge as we can. So again, as we're going through here, feel free to type in as many questions as you can. These are our platinum sponsors to the Houston Area Safety Council that with their efforts help us provide some of these webinar series. So we thank all of our platinum sponsors. Here's our agenda, quick agenda. Going to look at Governor Abbott's executive order to reopen Texas. I'm sure most of us are familiar with some of that stuff, but we're going to help answer some questions today. What's the current COVID-19 status in Texas right now? Dr. Delclos is really going to highlight how we're doing in Texas right now. Try to talk about some of the proper use of terminology, what some of these terms mean. Sometimes you hear them, the governor spout some things out, and maybe we don't understand exactly what we're talking about. So we're going to help simplify some of those things. Methods to reduce risk in the workplace. What can we do in the retail industry that will reduce the risk of not only the retail employees themselves, but also those customers coming in to those shops and places of business. A review of some of the resources that are available to you. So we're going to give you some of those websites so you can go and reference those yourselves later. But more importantly, a Q&A session throughout this seminar today. So again, type those questions in. We're going to answer as many as we can. Here's our list of panelists today, a wide variety of expertise. I'm very happy to know all of these people and can honestly say we have a stellar cast of panelists today for you. I'm not going to go through everybody individually, but if I went through all of their bios, it would take the full hour and a half. So you can see all their names, all of their top credentials that they have behind those names and where they're located in those educational facilities. We have a couple of guest panelists today that Dr. Delclos is going to introduce a little bit later. And I'm your moderator, Dr. Heisler. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at the Houston Area Safety Council. Again, thank you to everybody that registered and that is attending today. So just a quick umbrella summary. We all know that the governor is trying to do as much as he can to open up our economy. Texas took a big hit over the past couple of months, as every state in our union did. But our governor is determined to open us up as much as we can, but as safely as we can. And he's highlighted and mandated some criteria that we have to meet. So I'm gonna go through some of that. If you go to that website that I just showed, you can see some of these things. They are industry specific. So if you're looking to see what the ordinances are, the standards are for bars or gyms or retail, it's all outlined there. You can just click and see these pages that the governor's task force has laid out for those individual industry sectors. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but just so you're aware, there are some pretty specific thresholds and standards that these industries have to meet and have to roll out for them to be considered safe and ready to open. So just know that that task force is trying to do as much as they can to make sure that the employees in the retail sector are taken care of, and the customers entering those places of business are going to be able to shop and not get sick. So George, Dr. Delclos, I'm going to roll this over to you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Well, before I start my part, I just wanted to introduce our two guest panelists today. Both are from El Paso, and they represent different aspects of the retail industry. Melissa Santos is part of a third generation of Food City Supermarkets, which is a family-owned chain of supermarkets in El Paso. She's an analyst there, where she works mainly on forecasting and budgeting for the stores, and recently took on the task of what we may be referring to in this webinar as the COVID program administrator, but basically the task of ensuring that her stores are following guidelines and that they are looking out for the welfare and protection of both employees and customers from COVID-19. So Melissa really represents a large chain retailer. We also have Jeswina Legaspi, who is the sole owner of GAL Fashion, which is a high-end retail store in El Paso. Jeswina has 11 years in retail experience and has started up about 8 companies. At GAL Fashion, she pretty much is chief cook and bottle washer. She does everything from buying, marketing, accounting, finance, sales, and styling. So she's our representative, let's say, of smaller retail operations, and has been quite successful in handling the shelter-in-place and quarantine orders with a lot of strategy and adjusting their motto to cater to what the market needed. So we're very thankful to have them as guest panelists this week, and you'll be hearing more from them, and please feel free to address any questions to them as well as to us. So one of the important pieces of the governor's Reopening Texas report that is emphasized a lot is that decisions are going to be decisions and the loosening up of restrictions are going to follow a phased approach. I think everybody heard that the governor has already spoken several times. Most recently was this past Monday with another level of opening. And the other important thing of the report is that it must be data driven, that decisions need to be based on numbers. This is not an issue, although we hear a lot about it on TV, it should not be an issue of public health concerns being confronted with business or economic concerns, but quite the contrary. It's working together in partnerships, looking out for people, understanding the hit that the economy is taking, and really encouraging reopening, but with a mind, an open mind towards following the numbers carefully and then adjusting as needed. This slide, I was hoping to have the updated one for today, but it didn't arrive in time. But this is a slide that shows the daily numbers of the daily new numbers of cases of COVID in Texas as of last Friday. And what we see in this graph is very interesting. This is for the state of Texas. We see that the first red line, which is at about toward the end of March, was when the shelter-in-place policies began to take place all over the state. And you see that they were initiated at a point in time when the curve was rising. So there were more new cases every day. But you know, it takes roughly about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks to see the impact of any measure that one implements, whether that measure is positive or negative. So if we look at the second red line, which is about 2 weeks later, we see that that increase in the curve in Texas started to bend, started to flatten, and in fact started to decrease. And then it started to rise a little bit. And when the phase 1 reopening started, which started several days after the governor published the orders, which was on April 17th, the curve was rising again. And you know, you see that the increase happens before the reopening has officially taken place. So something was going on. Part of it could have been increased amount of testing. You know, the testing has been widely in demand, that we need to do more testing. And the more you test, the more cases you're going to find. And then, so it's premature to ascribe it to the reopening. But if you look 2 weeks later, which is where we are now, we're still rising. Next slide, please. However, this is just the general average for Texas. Texas is a big state. And if we look at Texas here, you see that it's a mosaic of different colors. The lighter colors represent fewer cases, in some cases even no cases, and the darker colors represent larger numbers of cases. And these are rates, they're not absolute numbers. So that means number of cases per population, per 100,000 of the population. So when you take that overall Texas number, you've got to also think about the heterogeneity, the variation that there is across the state. You may be living in a county where there really isn't much of an issue, or you may be living in a county that has a real issue. Okay, next slide. For example, in the Houston area, we look at the same curve and we see the same pattern. When the shelter-in-place orders were passed, ordinances were passed, after about 2 weeks, they started to decrease. They decreased nicely in Houston. And after phase 1 started, it's increased a little bit, but not at the same rate as the state on the whole. So this is just a Houston example, but it should help our employers locally to decide, you know, to what degree they open or they don't open. Next slide, please. The metrics that the governor's office is following is 2 metrics. Number 1, and I don't have a slide for this, is the number of total positive tests over the total number of tests. They're watching that, and as long as that number stays stable, let's say 5% of all tests done remain positive, then we will probably be okay. We hope to see it go down over time, but what we don't want is sharp increases over the total number of tests. But the other thing that they're looking at is hospital capacity, because we don't want to go back to a point where the hospitals are in a fix because they don't have enough beds or ICU beds or ventilators or enough protective equipment. And if you look on this slide, and this is Houston as of yesterday, excuse me, as of 2 days ago, in all of these categories that I just mentioned, you see green dots. Green is good. That means we have ample capacity at this point in time. So that's another metric that's being followed. Are there enough beds to handle a surge if it comes back? And are there enough ICU beds? And are there enough ventilators and enough protective equipment? And in that sense, I think the state overall as a whole has done a good job. Thank you.
All right, let me click on our next here. I think we have Dr. Janelle Rios coming up next.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. And Tommy, if you want to go ahead and scroll through the slides, and I shouldn't have done the animation. What I'm going to do is, thank you, briefly share with you all a well-known and very often used public health tool that serves as the foundation for controlling hazards in workplaces worldwide. It's known as the hierarchy of controls. And the hierarchy really refers to the level of effectiveness of each of those controls. So the most effective control is elimination. And you see that in the blue. And examples of elimination includes keeping the virus outside of the workplace. So have your employees self-screen and not come to work if they are ill, and to work remotely when at all possible. And I also wanted to highlight the 4th bullet in the blue section, to employ strategies to remove virus particles from the workplace, meaning cleaning and disinfection. And there, be sure to follow the EPA recommendations and follow the manufacturer's instructions on those disinfectants. And clean and disinfect often. For example, if you have a multi-story retail center, please wipe down the elevator buttons or the escalator railings pretty frequently, at least twice a day, if not more often. The next most effective control is engineering controls, and that really refers to isolating workers from the hazard. So here in retail, using those plexiglass sneeze type barriers or employing drive-through windows where you isolate your employees from customers to the extent possible. Also establishing social distance in the workplace by using floor markings and very clear signage, both to remind your employees as well as your customers. Our next lower level of control is administrative controls. And here I want to highlight training employees, training them on how to properly wash their hands, how to put on and take off gloves, how to wear facial coverings. And I have a few examples here of a store-bought surgical mask, a homemade mask, and to use those as much as possible. And if you can, because I believe we're talking mostly to employers, to relax sick leave policies so that you can encourage your employees to stay home if they're ill. And then the least effective control is the use of personal protective equipment. So as you reopen and expand your business during this time, please remember to provide the supplies that's necessary, including soap, water, hand sanitizer, gloves, respiratory protection if that's applicable, and all the cleaning and supplies. And that, so I was given 2 minutes to talk, so I'm happy to answer questions at the end if you have any. Thank you.
Sure, and I would just, thank you, Dr. Rios. And I just want to remind all of our attendees today, please, as our experts are talking about their relative topic, please type in questions so we don't forget about them, and we can certainly, if there's a hot one that comes through, then we can address it right then, but otherwise we'll address it at the end of the PowerPoint. All right, let's go on. It looks like it's Dr. Mena next.
Thank you. Yeah, as Dr. Rios mentions, some of the different approaches, if you will, to developing workplace safeguards, I wanted to highlight a few factors that may drive infection risks based upon the extent of exposure. And one of those is with the role of environmental sources, in particular inanimate surfaces. So the different surfaces in our surroundings. And we know that the novel coronavirus is not thought to be transmitted primarily that way. However, we do know from other studies in the peer-reviewed literature of other respiratory viruses that environmental sources in the workplace setting has had an impact as we've seen infection risks go up in different business settings. Another factor is the improper use of controls. So it's important to make sure that employees and patrons understand why they're wearing face coverings. It's important for specific businesses to know how often to disinfect certain surfaces. So again, the timing and where disinfection should take place is important. And then finally, one of the issues that I think has been lacking somewhat when we've been talking about reopening businesses and developing effective safeguards is the possible impact of the patron, the customer. So someone who's coming in from the outside who may not be familiar with the workplace safeguards that have been developed, and they could potentially cause a disruption as an employer, had already tried to mitigate the risk of transmission within that work setting among the employees. So I think that the role of the customer is very important consideration when developing workplace safeguards. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mann. Dr. Emery.
Hello, greetings from Houston. So I've got 4 points, and I would like to underscore that the real intent of this event is to be on a listening session to quickly go through some PowerPoint, but more importantly, hear what the concerns are and questions for the community that we serve. So my 4 points. Number one is we see a lot in the news about the term COVID-19, but unfortunately, the term prior to that is novel, and that's kind of been dropped from the media lexicon. But in fact, that's really important because the term novel means there are certain things we know about this virus, and there's certain things that are not known. And so, as an employer, I think it's important for people to understand that we're still learning as we're earning, so to speak, here, and that things may change. So, for example, the understanding that the disease could be transmitted without symptoms, without a person exhibiting symptoms, hence that's why the game kind of changed with regard to community masking. So I think within your employee base, it's probably important to set the expectation, this is what we know, and this is what we can control, and we will monitor the situation, but there could be changes coming. I think that's a prudent way to approach it. Also, just want to mention that something you might want to monitor in the evening news or other websites is something in epidemiology that we use a lot, what's called the R0. It's R sub-zero value. And that's an important number because what that says is, based on the data, how many additional cases would we expect to see from a confirmed case? And so the current literature suggests that the R0 for COVID-19 is 2.2. So for every one confirmed case that we have, we would expect to see 2.2 additional cases. To put that in perspective, I believe, and I'll defer to Dr. Delclos or Dr. Heisler on this, but I think the R0 for measles is about 15 or 16 or something. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay, got it. So anyhow, so just something you want to monitor for is that. So 2.2. The second thing, the point is, there's a lot of discussion about screening, and the questions I'm getting as the safety guy is that everybody's focused on temperature screening. But in fact, screening really begins at home, and several of the presenters have mentioned this, the notion of employers reaching out to their employees with some basic information prior to their arrival to the workplace. So things such as Dr. Rios mentioned, if you're feeling ill, don't come to work. Do you have these signs and symptoms? And the document that Dr. Heisler showed that the state has produced, there's some nice kind of screening questions there. So I would just encourage you to not focus so much on the issue of temperature screening upon arrival to the facility, but screening actually begins at home. My third point, it has to do with masking. There's a lot of confusion about this. The face coverings, so the cloth face coverings or the surgical masks, those are intended to keep you from inadvertently infecting someone else, right? They are not intended to protect you. That's not what they're designed for. Where we have other masks that are being worn are for the protection of the wearer. And you've probably heard a lot in the news about N95s or P100s or something called PAPRs, but those are intended to protect the wearer. And those have been in short supply. And so they have been necessarily restricted for use in the healthcare setting for those people who are working directly with patients that are either suspected or confirmed cases. And as the industrial might whirls into motion, more of those will be available. But we just want to be clear about the difference between face coverings and PPE. And then my last point has to do with cleaning and disinfection. One of the things I think for all employers, you want to make sure that whatever cleaning materials that are being used by your company or perhaps a contract company that you have, ensure that they are an EPA registered disinfectant, rule number one. Rule number two is if they're buying the stuff in bulk and then mixing it prior to its use, make sure that they're following manufacturer's recommendations. In other words, if it's 1 cup of this and 2 gallons of that or whatever it is, we've had experiences where the cleaning group is not following that. And then something specifically you want to focus on is what is considered the contact time. In other words, for these different products, it may say, so let's say we're doing something simple as cleaning doorknobs, and someone's going around just spraying the doorknob and then wiping it off. Well, that doesn't meet the criteria for the contact time. So that's something that we want to be aware of, that perhaps you spray the doorknob, or let's say you're cleaning off a table, for example, between patrons. The contact time may be 2 minutes or maybe 5 minutes. I don't know. You have to look it up to see which one it is. But I would encourage you to focus on the, because this environmental persistence issue is similar to what Dr. Mina was talking about. It can be a route of transmission, and we want to, but it can be managed if we pay attention to that. So I think the next slide is just a series of references. I don't remember, but I only had 1 slide, but I think the second slide might have been a bunch of references, but maybe it got cut out. But I'm happy to share that with whoever, anybody who's on the webinar, we can share it with.
Sure, I believe it's at the very end, so we'll show that as well. Before we go on to Dr. DeFreitas, I wanted to just bring George back into the conversation, because I want to make sure that people understand what that R naught means and what the 2.2 means. And Dr. Emery, Bob did a great job of comparing it to the measles. So the COVID-19 virus is much less contagious than the measles is. So, but George, where does it fit as compared to how contagious the flu is?
Right. So the flu has an R naught value of around 1.6. So that means that the novel coronavirus, the one that causes the COVID-19 infection, is more contagious. However, over time, with the measures, and this is sort of without considering any type of protections, once you start implementing protections, the goal is to lower that R naught for any infection. So once a community hits an R naught of 1 or less, that means we're in good shape. That means that it is not spreading, and that's what the goal is.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to move on here. Let's see. Is that the right slide, Dave?
That is it.
Okay. Take it away.
Thank you. Greetings from San Antonio, sunny San Antonio. What we wanted to do is at least begin to present to you as retail employers some resources that you might find beneficial as you embark on this this process of opening your doors again. And so, in addition to the many resources that we are posting on our website, we went ahead and listed some of the retail specific resources for you. And I would like to draw your attention first and foremost to the CDC. They have provided their interim guidance for businesses and employers there. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration as well has provided retail specific guidelines, as well as some resources, as well as the Texas Department of State Health Services. I'd also like to draw your attention to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Retail Association and the Texas Retailers Association. All of these associations are providing very good resources on their websites. And then lastly, I would like to draw your attention to the American Industrial Hygiene Association. And they recently published a whole slew of resources for a multitude of different industrial sectors, retail being one of those. And fantastic resources there, giving very specific, retail specific guidance and suggestions and some recommended practices as you embark in this process. And so just wanted to draw these resources to your attention. All of these will be made available, and as well as many other resources on our website.
So, to jump on top of that real quickly, there was a question that came in, I think specific to this topic, and maybe this slide answers some of it, but the question was, you know, where do managers get the detailed information on cleaning? How long does that cleaner need to be on that surface? Do they have to wipe it down, or can they just spray? How frequent should they be cleaning surfaces? Where are some good resources that dive into some of those details for these retailers?
So this is Bob. I don't know if it fired back up. Yeah. So it's just a few Google strokes away. But if you go to the EPA.gov and then just click or start hunting for registered disinfectants, that's the buzz term you want to use, and then on that, it will give a listing of the various products that have been registered by the EPA to be effective against this virus. But again, I want to point your attention to the contact time piece. So let me back up a little bit. First of all, make darn sure that the people, whoever it is that's doing it, or if you're doing it yourself, make sure you're mixing it to the right appropriate concentration as defined by the manufacturer, number one, and then number two is adhere to the contact time piece, and it varies with products. I've seen some as short as 2 minutes. I've seen some as long as 10 minutes for this particular instance. And so one of the things we don't want to do is get in a situation where we're cleaning. If you think about it, we're cleaning, but we're not disinfecting, because we're not adhering to the contact time piece, if that makes sense. And if anybody has problems trying to find that resource, let me know. I will, Dr. Heisler, I think FDA has now come out with, EPA has come out with a new clever little app that gets you right to that. I'll get one of the young guys in the department to get that. Or Janelle, do you have that?
I do, and it's called the N-List. Oh, I just pulled it up and I lost it. It's called List N Disinfectants on the EPA website, and it's for use specifically against SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. And you can search it by several different ways. So take a look at that and Google List N Tool, EPA, and it's from their Office of Public Engagement.
Contact, that's the thing I really want to drive home. The contact time is important, because that's what we're experiencing here, is that the folks are diligently doing additional cleaning, but they're not letting it reside long enough on the surfaces. Sure. As described by the very, I'm sorry.
And yes, and that more clarifies this person's question, is that they said, you know, I know where to go to get the list, but where are the details to tell me how long it has to be on there, how often I should be cleaning? So is it still on the EPA website, or is there additional resources for that?
I think it's a combination of two, and I'll let Dr. Rios weigh in on this, but because it's going to be product specific, right? So, you know, what product is, first of all, you're going to go down the list and say, okay, I'm using, you know, chemical X or whatever. Yep, it's on the list. That's good. Check. Second is, if you may be getting it, some retailers, I imagine, might buy it where it's already pre-mixed. That's a good way to describe it. Whereas others are might be getting in a concentrated form and then mixing it themselves. So that's one of the things we've encountered, where perhaps folks are diluting it too much. And then the contact time piece. I'll pause there. Dr. Rios, you agree with that, or? I mean, you're getting it on or we can't hear you.
So while Janelle's trying to figure out how to unmute, I just wanted to add one thing. So what Bob was saying about the correct application is important, but the other dimension is the frequency of application, the frequency of cleaning. And one of the things that's going to increase as you reopen is going to be, or should be in the majority of instances, frequency of cleaning. And a lot of that, you may not find specific number of days number of times per day that you should clean, but you need to take into account your own business characteristics, how often there are interactions with patrons, how often employee teams change over. So for example, one of the practices that is mentioned, or is recommended, is that you try and, if you're going to use staggered shifts, that you try and keep those people together as a team to avoid spread. But that means that when one shift ends and another one begins, that might be an opportunity to clean in between. So it's not only application at each instance, but also the frequency of cleaning that you need to pay attention to.
Yes.
And this is Christy.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Christy.
I was just going to mention some of the manufacturers of those disinfecting products also have information on their websites regarding contact time and use. So not advocating for any one company, but some of the common companies like Lysol and Clorox, and they have different specifications on their website about how long to leave it on the surfaces.
And Dr. Mean, I should have asked you this. I apologize, but I mean, from your experience, it's usually like 2 to 10 minutes, somewhere in there.
Right, it varies like that.
Yeah.
More commonly, I think like a couple of minutes, which some of us don't tend to do in our households, and that's another issue. But that's right.
Sure. Okay. Got it.
So I was going to mention that website that I talked about a while ago, the End List, you can search products by contact time. So if, for example, you only have 2 minutes that you can spare for contact time, because this is a rolling handrail for an escalator, for example, then you can search for products that will disinfect and kill the SARS-CoV-2 virus in a matter of 2 minutes. Now, I don't know how harmful that product will be to the rubbery kind of thing that goes around and around in an escalator, but those are things that you have to take a look at. The other really good source of information is the product label, and as Bob mentioned, the concentration, the contact time, the frequency, a lot of that information might be there. I hope that helps.
I just thank you to our friend, Dr. Chip Carson, for posting the website in the chat box. So we'll make sure everybody gets that who needs it. And another question that we get frequently is, will I have access to these slides and this recording? Absolutely. We're gonna have this entire webinar, the recorded version posted, and then we will send you or post the slide deck as well. So absolutely, we want to make sure this knowledge gets out to everybody. Another question about cleaning and not so much surfaces. And George, we've had this question posed multiple times. What about cleaning or purifying the air in retail spaces?
I'd love to answer that, but I know that is one of Bob Emery's favorite questions.
Okay. Well,
it's one of his pet peeves.
Okay, so one of the main things, Bob's opinion, but we have some scientific data to back this up, has to do with what's called ACH, air changes per hour. And in some recent work that we did here with regard to outpatient clinics, and there's rankings for what type of procedures are carried out. But my best recommendation, and I defer to Dr. Delclos and others on this, but a good rule of thumb in this current environment would be 4 to 6 air changes per hour. But the important point here is not air circling back around, but more outside air coming in, so that 4 to 6 room changes per hour are occurring in this setting. Because just the mere notion of recirculation could be problematic until this situation resolves itself. So there are means for disinfecting air intakes. So, for example, there's filters, obviously, high efficiency, what they refer to as HEPA filters. And there's also inline UV lights. So some of you may have seen these. Sometimes when you go to a clinic, you'll see these mounted on the wall. It's blocked by usually a metal screen, because UV light can actually damage your eyes. They're mounted, and that's typically for tuberculosis control. But this virus happens to be susceptible to UV light, and that's why it doesn't persist long out in the outside because of the UV exposure. So UV light is another option there. So that's some of the approaches that are being used if people choose to go that route. But to me, if we go back to, I think it was Dr. Rios's hierarchy of controls, the flow through ventilation is probably your biggest friend. 4 to 6 air changes per hour with outside air. I'll weigh in with my colleagues at this point. George, would you agree with?
Yep, that's the average. And if you don't know how to calculate that, talk to your HVAC person, because they should know how to do that and measure it.
Right.
You said 4 to 6 air exchanges per hour?
Correct. Yeah.
Just make sure everybody got that. There was a question in this same realm of cleaning. What about fogging and electrostatic disinfecting?
It does work. We actually have a device that does that ourselves, a hand fogger, we are using what's called vapor phase hydrogen peroxide, and that product does not appear to damage surfaces or electronics, so that's been good. But there are other products out there as well. And so it's something, I know there are commercial firms now that are offering these services where they'll come in and perhaps fog a place after hours or before opening or something like that. My advice would be, well, we have a daycare here at the university, right? And so we've actually used this device within the daycare. But I would just make sure that the product that you're using is an EPA registered disinfectant. That's what I would want to make sure.
Perfect. A question for some of our special guests, Ms. Legaspi and our other guests. As you guys gear up to open, or maybe you're already open and doing some different cleaning methods, can you share what some of those methods that you're implementing might be?
Go ahead. Yeah, you can go first. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm in the grocery business, and so we've been dealing with this from the beginning. And one of the things that's important for us is to make sure to really sanitize all the high contact surfaces. So shopping carts are sanitized after every use on the handles. We make sure that all the cashiers have product to sanitize the counters and the little belt, just different things like that. And so, I mean, we've sanitized with sprays that we have access to because we can pull from different warehouses. But it is difficult to find sanitizing material right now. It's in short supply, and even as a grocer, where we actually sell sanitizing supplies, it is in short supply. And so you'll find that you need to use more generic things. You're not going to find the name brand products like Clorox and Lysol as often, but there are some effective generic labels out there.
So to follow up on that, I obviously many of the sectors in the U.S. have shut down or slowed down. One sector that I would think, at least anecdotally, when I walk into the grocery store, it's packed, right? Especially as people get panicked and rush the store. And so, from a food industry standpoint, have you guys seen a slowdown, or have you seen an increase, or what are you seeing in your sector?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an increase, especially with restaurants closed and then slowly reopening. All the demand for food has now been put on grocery stores. And, you know, obviously takeout has always been an option since this whole thing started, but the demand for grocery has just increased astronomically. And so you have to deal with these huge crowds, and whether that's, there's been certain points where we have to limit the number that are in our store, and that's hiring security to stand at the door and let a certain number in. That's asking customers to only have one person per household, and that really minimizes the amount of people in a store. Especially here in El Paso, people are used to going shopping with their whole family. It's a whole experience. It's an outing, and we've had to ask people just send one person from your house, and you actually see when we started doing that, you see when you look out in the store, there's definitely more customers in terms of the number of transactions, but there's less crowding because you're seeing one person, you know, either in the produce section or wherever they are, instead of this whole family crowding around.
Sure.
So that really helps.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Legaspi. Tell us a little bit about your store and what you guys are gearing up to do.
Well, basically, we kind of eliminated all people in the store. The only people that are allowed there are the 3 employees, which is me and 2 other ones. So everything is curbside pickup. We've done everything from virtual sales to showing through FaceTime, wearing our masks and gloves. So there's really like eliminating all, I mean, there's no one in the store. So it's sales through virtual, which is really cool. And we've kind of shifted that, and we've actually done a lot better than before. So it's interesting.
Good. So I know, you know, the governor initially had said retail stores can open up, but only curbside. And then he came out and said, well, now we can open up to 25% capacity. So at what point do you think a retail store such as your own might decide to let customers back in?
Well, we've been doing by appointment only. So, but it's interesting because our store it's very high end. So you're never going to have more than 5 people in the store at one time anyway. And we're used to appointment only. So it really hasn't affected us as much as before. The only time it did was Mother's Day because everybody wanted to come in last minute. So we just made sure that everybody wore masks, and if you didn't have one, we sold it to you. And we also sold Safe Touch, that way you don't touch the door handle, and we sell hand sanitizer. So basically, we've used this as an opportunity to sell you everything you need in order to be safe. So we kind of piggybacked off of that and maximized the opportunity as well as making it safe. So.
Gotcha. So I'll ask this to both of you. Are either of your stores doing any type of screening at the front door before you let people in? Thermometer checks, or you have to be wearing a mask, or asking questions, any screening type processes?
Well, we keep the door locked. So it's like, again, it's appointment only. We don't just let anyone in. So it's kind of like if you have an appointment, you can come in. If you don't, then we'll just make sure that there's not that many people in there. But again, we've never had that problem to begin with. So it hasn't been much of a difference for my store.
Sure. Ms. Santos?
We screen our employees every day. So before their shift starts, they have to have their temperature checked. And have a log that the health department requires. Every city in Texas might be different as far as what their health department requires. But we make sure that every person's temperature is taken as far as employees. And then they're asked if they have any of the symptoms that they not report to work, or if they've been around anyone that's positive to not come to work. All our employees are asked to wear masks. So that's just now part of the uniform so that they can't refuse to wear it. But on the customer side, it's a little bit more difficult. We're dealing with thousands of people every day in our 3 stores, and so we can't do temperature checks. Even though masks are mandatory in El Paso, and there's been different debates about that. We have signs posted that ask customers to wear masks, but we've had so many different encounters with customers, whether they want to wear the mask or they don't, or customers get upset for other customers not wearing the mask and vice versa, that it causes major arguments and things that can just erupt really quickly. And so we've made the decision that we don't want to put our employees at risk or in danger. You never know if a customer has a gun, a knife, or what they can do. And so, we kindly ask that they wear a mask. If they refuse to, we let them be, because we've seen too many incidences where customers get very, very upset. And honestly, it's not worth it to put our employees in danger like that.
Absolutely. And I was just, Bob may be about to say the same thing I am, but I was going to highlight this hierarchy control again, this pyramid, because I think this is, to your point, Melissa, this is at the foundation of how you prevent something from happening. You remove the hazard. So screening as much as you can, making your as much as you can, right? Making those customers wear a mask, or highly advising they wear a mask, screening your own employees for fever or any symptoms, and preventing that hazard from coming into the store is the most effective method. Now, and we obviously realize that's not always feasible, right? Sometimes you just can't do as much as you probably would want to do, but as much as you can, you'll hopefully reduce that risk. Bob, did you have something to add?
I didn't know if I was allowed to actually ask a question.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The reason for the parties that are on this web thing, one of the issues I see, by the way, I agree with everything you're saying there, but one of the issues I see coming up is as this legion of contact investigators are being brought on board, so that when someone, going back to this R0 value, we have a confirmed case, and now there's going to be calls to what I would refer to as unsuspecting individuals, good people, but it's just, I get a call out and, after dinner that says you may have been potentially exposed, and they won't know what to do. And so I think that's something that we need collectively as a society to be prepared for. And I would defer to Dr. Delclos to maybe summarize what the next steps will be, but I can just envision many people becoming quite upset because they don't, maybe I'm at home with my children, or, do I go to work, and does the employer understand, and that sort of thing. So because as we get more and more of these contact investigations occurring, we're going to get more and more of that spillover.
So I'm glad you brought that up, Bob, because when you look at the governor's report, at least when I looked at it initially, it's a little bit confusing. It talks about employers and contact tracing. I don't know if Melissa and Jaswina agree or not. They talk about employers and contact tracing in the same sentence, as if it seems as if the employers have a role in contact tracing. They don't. Let me make that really clear. Contact tracing is something that is done by a health department. So the way it works is when the health department hears about a positive confirmed case, they have a whole team of contact tracers. Literally, they are gearing up to have them in the thousands. They needed, the last time I checked, they needed 8,000 in the entire state.
That's correct.
So, yeah, 8,000. So they will call this person that's positive and ask them about who they were in touch with, and and then kind of take down those people's names and contact them to let them know that they may have been exposed. And they'll provide some guidance, etc. They may also recommend that they not go to work if the exposure was really severe for at least 14 days, for example. And so employers should know about that. But really, and I don't know if it's come up or not, but I want to make it really, really clear. Employers really should have no business in taking on contact tracing by themselves. It's not an easy art, and also there's a risk of losing confidentiality, because when the state health department calls, or the local health department calls for a contact trace, even the person they call and they tell them you may have been exposed to somebody, when that person says to whom, we can't say. So keeping confidentiality is very important, and in a workplace that sometimes becomes a little touchy. Frankly, human nature may be that a well-meaning employee who is positive will call their employer and say, hey, I'm positive. And then it kind of starts from there, and then confidentiality is lost. But obviously it was the person themselves that revealed that. But Contact tracing is something done by a health department. You will find out about it as an employer because the employee will call you and say, I've been told to stay at home. But really, you shouldn't ask too much more than that. Okay, I don't know if y'all agree or not.
Just from, yes, from the employer's perspective, if someone is positive and they can't go to work, obviously, you're required to pay them for a certain amount of time, 100% of their pay. That was a new law passed that went effective April 1st. So in order to pay them 100%, you kind of have to know that they were positive. So that eventually will come out to the employer.
What about those that are placed in quarantine? In other words, they were exposed, but they don't have the disease, but they've been told to stay home. Same deal?
So as the law reads, I believe if you are in a household, let me see if I have it somewhere. If you are with someone who's tested positive and you have to be quarantined, I believe you're also paid 100% for 2 weeks. It's called the Paid Sick Leave and Expanded Family and Medical Leave under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. There's also, you also have to pay someone, I think it's 2/3 of their pay for 12 weeks if they can't work because of no child care.
Good feedback. Thank you. I think Michelle had a comment to make.
Yeah, I do. So I want to go back to sanitation of high contact surfaces and sanitizing shopping carts. What I've been seeing as when I enter shopping centers, masked of course, is that the end of the cart is placed closest to the entry door. So if that end of the cart is not being sanitized and your customers or patrons are walking in and grabbing the end of the cart, you may want to think about if you're only sanitizing those handles, reversing that and placing the handle side closest to wherever they're going to be grabbed. So as customers walk in, they're grabbing the part of the cart that's been sanitized.
That's a good point, and even probably applies to the smaller baskets you can carry, because most of the time they're stacked all together and you have to go and dig one out. Not so easy. So maybe separating those handheld baskets out may be a little bit easier. It's a good point. All right, a question came in, and probably going to go back to Bob. This person said, I'm assisting a gym in opening. Does the 4 to 6 air exchanges per hour still apply to a gym if they have high respiratory rates inside that facility, or should we increase that air exchange rate?
A good question. At a minimum, I would go to 4 to 6, maybe increase it. But what I think what you have to understand is that as you bring in outside air, and then you have to condition that air, either heat it or cool it, it's going to drive up your utility bill. And so I think I can tell you, and I'll defer to Dr. Delclos here in a second, but based on this project we were just involved with, with regard to a high intensity, let's say a CrossFit gym or something like that, right? That I'm not sure that would even reach the threshold for something akin to a cough-inducing procedure like intubating a patient, right? And so, I've been asked for many questions that I'm like, I'd give you my best guess. But Dr. Delclos, would you agree?
Well, I'm not an HVAC expert by any means. I would think. I don't know what the right number of air exchanges is above 4 to 6 for a gym, but one point that you made earlier, Bob, I think is very important. It's to distinguish between ventilation, which is the exchange of air, replacing it with fresh air from the outside, and recirculation, which is is not a good thing. Imagine if you take a room and you seal it off completely and you've got some sort of dust in the carpet or in the air, and you put on a fan in that room, the only thing you're going to achieve is that those dust particles will stay suspended in the air for a longer period of time. Hence, they could be more prone to being inhaled. You're not exchanging air, you're just recirculating. The reason I bring this up is because a lot of gyms have fans too. So you gotta compare, you know, or make sure that you don't confuse air exchanges with simply putting in fans. They're not equivalent, and one may actually offset the other. Again, I'd talk to your HVAC person about that.
And also focus, for Dr. Mina here for a second, but the fomite issue, that the surface is going to be equally important in this whole effort as people come back to gyms, the routine cleaning and disinfection of the either, you know, the apparatuses that they get on, or the, you know, weights, or whatever it is. Would you?
Right. I know we're going to address gyms later, but it's a reminder of the human interaction, and when you have these high touch surfaces in any establishment. And so it's that comment, and Michelle's question earlier, then maybe going to Jaswina and Melissa reminds me of other aspects within retail. So a couple that come to mind regarding the keypads for transactions and how that relates to whether a customer is better off going through a self-checkout. I've seen grocery stores where there's someone standing there with the disinfectant to wipe down the keypad between patrons, but then where's the contact time there? Or are you better off going through a line with the cashier? And I've seen in some establishments where the cashier has a hand sanitizer between customers, but that's not always the case. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, it's more manual transaction. Again, we've been doing everything through virtual, so we take care of all the transactions, so they haven't been able to touch anything. But if they do come in, I mean, it hasn't been an issue or anything yet. I mean, now there's different ways to pay, like just what is that thing called? When you just put your card on top of it. So I haven't had any, luckily I haven't had any issues like you, Melissa. Same, but so that's my feedback.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we accept card, check, and cash, and that's really difficult to just go to one type of payment in a grocery store when you're dealing with so many different types of people. But we've tried to minimize contact. So we used to have the signature requirement on credit cards. We've eliminated that if they use the chip on the credit card, because by law that's not required. So if they use the chip, they just enter the chip or the tap, and no signature requirement comes up. Our cashiers are wearing gloves, so if they're touching cash, you know, the hope is that we're minimizing the contact there, and they're changing out their gloves regularly. But as far as disinfecting the pin pads, a lot of people have been spraying them directly, which is going to ruin them. And so you cannot spray your pin pad just directly. So you have to either get like a wipe that has disinfectant and then wipe it down. I've seen some retailers cover the buttons with a plastic, and then they disinfect that plastic. But it's really important that you do not spray it, or you'll ruin your pin pad.
Correct. Yes.
Has there been thoughts about, and well, I know that there have, regarding direction down aisles, you know, customer direction, their signage, and I know I've heard some customers complain or voice concern that they can't see the direction, maybe not yours, but others, because they don't have it posted at eye level. You're pushing a cart, but the direction arrow was on the floor. But that, and maybe coinciding with your comment about families not going to the grocery store, limit congestion. You have the direction flow, but also if you don't have as many cashier lines open, like I know some establishments are really fostering that self-checkout, then you are almost forcing customers to be lined up down aisles, and sometimes it's in the wrong direction. I just wondered if that type of potential chaos have you experienced in your store?
Yeah, so for us, we do not have the arrows on the floor. We have floor stickers that ask to keep a 6-foot distance throughout the store, and then for our checkout lines. But the arrows, honestly, it's a good idea in theory, but it's more confusing for the customers. They don't pay attention to them anyways. You can't have someone at every single aisle enforcing it. It's just another thing that makes people upset, whether at the store or at other customers for not following it. And the way that people shop, the flow that they take, you know, people have their set patterns, their habits in the way that they shop. And it's really difficult to change that. And I think that people just monitor themselves already. If they see too many people in an aisle, they just wait. And to put the arrows, I've been in stores where they have them and people aren't paying attention. And so I think it's not worth it. But as far as our checkout lines, we have, at our peak times, we have made sure that all of our registers are open. So we don't have self-checkout at our stores. It's all with cashiers. And so we've opened all our registers at our peak times. And so that makes our lines go a lot quicker. And then again, we do have the floor stickers for every aisle, for every checkout line, to keep that 6-foot distance. But as many cashiers as you can have really helps get the people in and out.
And that is a great segue into one of our attendees' questions, and it's about number of people in restrooms. What are there any recommendations, or maybe some practical things that our panelists are doing? Or what's the recommendation on number of people in restrooms? Is there a specific number of people per square foot that should be in a restroom? How do you monitor that? Or is it just open season because it's a restroom?
Yeah, for us, we don't have a number. I mean, I suppose it's the number of stalls that you have is the max people that can be in there. But we really don't have a restroom crowding problem yet. So I suppose
yeah, when I've been to some stores, you know, they may have a sign on the door that says, please limit, you know, to 6 feet, but there's no monitoring of that process. And I guess if you got to go, you got to go. But it's a great question. You know, is there any regulation or standard or guidance out there to limit people in the bathrooms? But unless a panelist has that answer, I'm not sure there is one.
We only have one restroom, so.
Yeah. There you go, easy. Another question that popped up, could Dr. Emery comment on the effectiveness and scientific support for the use of electrostatic spray technology compared to fogging technology?
I think so. There is a technique that's being used in a fogger. If I think that's what the questioner is asking, that it's an ionized. What's the best term to use? It's hydrogen peroxide, but it's thermally ionized. And my hunch is that's what they're asking about. And I have heard about this. We do not have one here, but it has been used, and I believe it has been determined to be effective, because I want to say it's being used to disinfect hospital rooms. But perhaps the listener can weigh in on that one, or maybe contact me on the side on that one, because that's another technique. I guess what I want to clarify is, are you talking about hydrogen peroxide, vapor phase hydrogen peroxide? That's
sure
what I'd like to clarify.
Sure, and he's welcome to type in a clarification into the chat box there.
Yeah.
Yep. And so somebody again asked if this recording will be available after the session. Absolutely, the entire session will be available with the slides. And what we try to do is make sure that we have answered all of the questions live, so that way you can go back and listen to the answers on the recording. If for whatever reason we run out of time, we will still answer those written in questions and supply that to everybody. Dave, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just going back to the question on the restroom signage and hospital doors, I would refer those in attendance to look into these hand-free door openers.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're called pedal pulls, where you can open the door with your feet and it's hands-free. So that would eliminate the potential contact of the hand on any type of doors, not just the restrooms, but other doors within a facility.
Yeah, that's a good tip. We actually installed those on our restrooms at the Houston Safety Council, and they're effective. They work.
I would just add that for any door, any that I come across, regardless of whether it's a restroom or something else, if I can at all use my elbow, I use it.
It's a good point as well. Maybe a question for our two panelists from our industry. What are you most concerned about? What are you most scared about? You know, as this thing gets better or gets worse, what are some of the hurdles maybe you've had to overcome, or maybe some of the obstacles that you're dreading that may come into effect, whether it's, you know, lack of meat in the grocery store, or the restrictions get even more relaxed? You know, what are some of those things that are kind of on the back of your head that maybe some of our attendees that are joining us today may you know, have the same feelings?
You want me to go first?
Sure, go ahead.
So, well, I've had two issues. One is the lack of inventory. A lot of the stuff that we get gets shipped overseas from Europe or China, and well, shipping has been a disaster. So I'm not able to fill in my inventory, so I can't sell the turn to sales ratio as fast as I need to, which ultimately hurts like my whole business plan. So that's been a headache, number one. And a lot of vendors aren't even producing. They've gone out of business, or they can't produce their garments. So it leaves me to start over from scratch. And also the second thing is I'm used to high-end luxury price point items, which no one wants to buy right now, obviously, because you can't travel, you can't wear formal gowns or anything like that. So I've had to completely change my business strategy. 180, which has been kind of fun, to be honest, to kind of see what people want in the market and you know, target to them. But I mean, it's like starting over from scratch out of nowhere without, you know. So that's been my two biggest hurdles.
Sure. Melissa?
Yeah, I think a few things, especially from the beginning. I think our biggest concern has been the health of our employees. We have about 200 employees, and certain positions interact with customers a little bit more than others do. Cashiers obviously are at the forefront of all this and are interacting with every person. And so it's really scary to think, especially when it all started, the media, you know, makes you think that everyone's going to get it if you touch someone who you're not related to or in the same household. And so, you know, we've had to deal with the first week we had a cashier have a panic attack when the rushes came in, and it was like a first experience for us, just experiencing an insanely crowded store. When the mayor here issued the stay-at-home order, the press conference wasn't even done, and our store got rushed. And we weren't ready with security, and our store was just, I have never seen a store like that. And so the health of our employees has always been a big thing, and so making sure that they have the masks and the gloves and the sanitizing material is just really important, and making sure that they know that they can talk to us if they're scared or if they need to take time off. We've had to you know, come up with different policies regarding time off if you're not sick. And then also the prices of things are going up, and so that's been a big concern, and I can see that for not just the grocery retailers but other types of retailers. Prices are increasing on things, and customers will want to accuse you of price gouging when that's not true. I'm sure you all have seen the price of beef increase incredibly over the last few weeks. In March, the price of eggs went up a lot. And so customers don't necessarily understand the concept of supply and demand all the time. And so we've had to be really transparent with our customers, and we've posted on our website letters explaining this is why egg prices are going up and this is what we're doing, or this is why beef prices are going up and this is what we're doing. And we're not making as much money in terms of margin on some of these items because we don't want to pass on that whole cost to the customer, and yet they still get upset. And so that's really important, to try to be transparent with our customers and try to explain the increase in price. And And then also the lack of inventory. Sometimes it's going to be about another year until we're back to normal, at least for all grocery retailers, in terms of supplying your whole shelf with everything you need. We're still short on certain things. Different companies aren't making as many varieties and things, and so you may have been used to different types of mayo and different sizes and different types of bottles, and they're scaling back to just a few SKUs. And that's the same with all different types of food. And so that's been a big adjustment.
Excellent. Thank you for those comments. We have an attendee that wrote in, and it looks like he or she coming from in Ohio, so welcome to Texas. And they just wanted to comment that the Costco's in Ohio have locked every other bathroom stall to keep that distance and keep people hopefully out. Maybe they still might be lingering, I guess, in the bathroom, but they've done their part to lock those every other cabin to make sure that they can try to reduce as many people in the restrooms as possible. So that was a good comment there. Another comment that came in was to say, you know, be cautious of the fogging and the disinfecting electrostatic fogging as well, because, you know, hydrogen peroxide is a toxic chemical. So just because they can fog doesn't mean it's always the best to do, and that needs to be done by professional people and probably some type of respirator gear, I would imagine. Moreover, you know, when you get your facility fogged, you certainly don't want to ruin your product that you have in the store by those foggers. I would highly doubt that Ms. Legaspi wants to spray all of her fine clothing with chemicals. So just be cautious of what is in that chemical and who is performing that process for you. That was a good comment by Dr. Carson again.
If I can, hey, this is Bob. Just I was on mute there, but back to that point. The reason we chose to go with the vapor phase hydrogen peroxide option for the fogging was that its residual is of water.
Good.
In other words, it was considered to be, from our assessment, the least damaging or impactful to surfaces, whether it be a product in a store or, you know, that's just the decision we made. But anybody who's interested in fogging, or maybe it's a customer demand that they want to, you know, have the place fogged, I would ask about those residuals.
Absolutely, and I think that what has happened now is, you know, when so many businesses are struggling to you know, turn a profit on what they normally do, sometimes they tend to say, well, you know what, today I'm going to be a fogger. So just make sure you know what you're getting, what the chemical is, and what needs to go on should you hire somebody to come out and do that. Another question that came, it's regarding gloves. They say there are mixed messages about the use of disposable gloves to mitigate the viral transmission for employees in the retail sector. Could somebody talk about when gloves might be indicated?
I think we have one of the worldwide experts on this call on fomites. So Dr. Mina, by all means.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that, but I think the overall message, and everyone else can please weigh in, especially the guest panelists regarding practical aspects, is that the viruses and other pathogens can be transmitted through gloves, or, you know, from surfaces to gloves to a person. So in many settings, it's probably better to practice very frequent and effective hand washing, as we all have been taught, you know, to do, as opposed to wearing gloves. If gloves aren't worn the right way, they can still transmit the novel coronavirus to services and to other people. And so I think just in special circumstances, I went through an establishment, it was a car wash, for example, and it was someone who had one specific job, standing there to touch that pin pad and, you know, put the order in and the specifications for the car wash, wore gloves the whole time, wasn't interacting with the public or handling money and then not handling money. So just something to think about. Still what you're doing. Gloves is not necessarily a safeguard to protect you if they're not used properly, if they're not taken off properly. And then sometimes when we wear gloves, we forget about those aspects where washing is effective in providing that protection.
Gloves make me very nervous. I think they give us a false sense of security. You know, when you look at how gloves are used in a hospital, they really are intended for single use. You put them on, you do something, you take them off. That's not all that easy to do when they're in short supply or when you're out in the non-healthcare setting. So I worry about the false sense of security that gives us, because as Christy was saying, you know, you touch something and you will be transmitting it. You might protect yourself for a certain point in time until you touch your face, by the way, with a glove. But you may also be contributing to spread. So if you do use gloves, I think the parameters need to be very clear, and the folks need to be trained on how long they can use them, what the risk of transmission is, so that at least they think about it as they're doing it.
Excellent. Let's see here. Question for Dr. Del Close. If we start to see an increase in infections in Texas after reopening, what do you think the threshold should be for deciding to slow back down?
So, well, I said at the beginning that this is not an issue of public health being confronted with economics or business, right? It's really a partnership. I think trends are more important than spot decisions made on, you know, on just one data point, something that happens one day. You have to look at it over time. At the same time, I think we can't ignore trends. If there truly is an increase that can be traced back to a certain reopening action, I think we need to pay attention to it. I don't know what the threshold is. There is a threshold, for example, for hospitals, which is that they have to maintain at all times at least 15% capacity should there be a surge in cases, that they can accommodate it. You know, nobody wants lots more cases, of course, but what we want even less is so many cases that they overwhelm the hospitals, because then you know, we're back to that whole issue about the peak. And overloading or flooding the hospital system. In general, when there's hospital capacity, we can handle the cases. You don't want them to happen, but if they happen, the health system has the capability of handling them. So I think the 15% rule is reasonable in Texas, because overall in Texas, the hospitals have done pretty well from all standpoints, from standpoint of having enough rooms and ventilators and PPE. There have been close calls, especially with PPE, but we fortunately figured out ways to handle them, and then sometimes just dragging things out a day or two allows you to buy enough time for the supplies to come in or to figure a way out. With respect to the case trends, you know, the original CDC guidelines called for states not to start their reopening processes until there had been a sustained decline in cases over a 14-day period. And we also know from the news, and I'm not being political or anything, but that pretty much no state is following that, or a rare state is following that. So then you go to, okay, well, then what are they following? As long as they have some parameters that are common sense and that are reasonable or can be reasoned, I'm okay with that, as long as they then stick to what they said, right? Which is, we're going to monitor this, and this is going to drive our decisions. It's going to be science-driven or data-driven. What I worry about is when we put out parameters out there and then we don't follow them.
Right. Well, I do my best not to unmask anybody, but when I do see an esteemed colleague online asking questions, thank you, Dr. Felkner, for that question. It was a good one, and we miss seeing you. Another question, should cashiers wear gloves?
Is that a question for me or for
Oh, sure. Well, why don't we ask it to you first? Are your cashiers wearing gloves?
They are. As far as how often they're changing, I mean, obviously you can change them more often than you are, because we're not doing it after every transaction. But this sounds awful to even say, but a lot of the things that you have to do are for the appearance to the customers. Obviously, it's for the safety of your employees. But customers are looking at every single thing that you do, and if they see bare hands, especially around food, they freak out. So we have bakeries and delis, and our employees there have always worn gloves, and they change them out after every single transaction in the bakery and deli. Our grocery cashiers are a little different, but they are wearing gloves.
So, hey, this is Bob, and I agree with everything. Melissa, when you are ready to go to grad school, you come to Houston, and we're going to set you up here with a scholarship, because you have hit the nail on the head here. It's one thing with the PPE issue, but there's also the optics associated with it, and that's really, really important. And so I think the combination of the two, if I were asked, I'd say yes, by all means, wear gloves, and then we'll work out some frequency on when they would be switched out. But when you're ready to go to school, you want to get a doctorate, I can print out. We got some paper here.
I just wanted to add, Melissa, though, I think it's important to look at your cashiers and know exactly what they're doing, because it may be perfectly fine to wear gloves, because the level of interaction between his or her gloved hand and another person may be close to zero. Or maybe all they're doing is picking up the products on the assembly, on the belt, and then running them through the scanner. And yes, we can talk about fomites on surfaces, et cetera. Generally, cardboard stuff is, Christy can correct me, doesn't last very long. But even if that's the case, and she or he are the only ones that they are in contact with, as long as they're mindful about not touching their faces and all of that, then you can prolong the use of the glove there. What I worry about is when they're exchanging, you said exchanging money, so that they're grabbing something from another person that it's been in their pocket, or somehow interacting with other folks, then I begin to get worried. And then maybe the changing out of the gloves should be more frequent.
Right.
But observing practices is very important. And that's something that you can't put on every guideline. We can't algorithm safety to death, as I call it. There are always going to be exceptions, and that's where you, the individual employers, come in, because you know your business, and you can take general principles and figure out ways to apply them to your business that no professional society is going to figure out for you as well as you do. So you need to know it and observe.
Right. Yeah, I think it's very important for retailers, just like you said, your customers, you know your demographics, and like the mask thing. I've seen stores where you absolutely cannot come in unless you wear a mask, and for us, we know our customers, and they have, and that's why we've stopped absolutely enforcing it, because our customers are going to cause major fights that can be violent, and it's safer to not force it on them.
So let me just jump in and say so masks work. Universal masking, reciprocal masking, and I'm talking about masking, not PPE, and Bob made the distinction. They work, but they're no substitute for social distancing. The thing that works the best is social distancing. You acknowledge that there are going to be situations where you can't keep that, and that's where the face covering has an added value, right? An added protective value, but they work.
So Melissa, I forgot that Dr. Mina's on this shindig. So you just walk across over to El Paso. You tell Dr. Mina to give you a degree in public health.
I did have a follow-up question that's similar, I think, to what we've been talking about, masking and social distancing, and then just even the layouts of the stores. Regarding, and this is for anyone on the panel, from a safety perspective as well as a practical perspective, I've noticed many establishments have only now one entrance and exit. So if a grocery store had two, one's closed, and then there's one where people are coming and going. And I wondered, just safety overall to have that, and then two, during high peak times for a grocery store, there can be several people congregated in that area. They have the security guard, you have at least two people wiping down the carts, and then people coming and going. And what ask questions about that. I was told this was because they need to monitor their capacity, and that was the best way to do it. If they had 2 entrances and exits, it was difficult to say that they were maintaining 25% capacity. But I'm just wondering from the panelists, in terms of congestion and the whole point of having the aisle directions that may or may not be effective anyways, what are your thoughts about having that one entrance and exit? And just Sweeney or Melissa, your operation's a little bit different right now, but Melissa, do you have that set up in your grocery stores?
No, so 2 of our 3 stores have only one entrance exit, and so it's not possible for us. But especially with this, we have one security guard usually, and I think he keeps people moving, but usually people, I think it's just the nature of society now and just the nature of all of this. People are generally moving, they're not lingering. You know, we have customers that are, before this, would come every day. They buy their lottery tickets every day. They hang out by the lottery machine. We're not seeing that anymore. And so I think people self-monitor themselves for the most part. You have some people that just don't care at all, and you kindly ask them to move along. But yeah, for us, we only have one entrance and exit.
So it's about two points. One is you have to be very careful about the fire code issue, because we've had these many requests about this, and there's take COVID off the table for a second. We have to maintain these paths of egress for people to be able to get out of the building if it catches on fire, right? So please be careful if you're trying to channel folks in through certain doors, one in, one out. I get the logic there, but don't lock those other doors. Make sure, and number 2 is, as people are trying to create social distancing. So let's take a grocery store that has an eat-in area. I don't know what you call it, cafe or something, you know. And so maybe what they're doing is removing every other table or these chairs so that it forces social distancing. But the problem is they're stacking them up in front of the fire exits in the back of the store or the back of the restaurant. So I think that's something all of us need to be collectively aware of as we do these engineering solutions. Make sure we don't cause other problems with regard to fire code or blocking exits.
Right. I have not been a fan of the one entrance exit, but what I have been told from employers was that they did that because that was their best method of counting people and maintaining the capacity that they were required to do. So.
Excellent. Well, we have reached our time, a couple of minutes over, which is fine. We got through every question that was posed to us today. So unless there are any wrap-up comments, which I'll open up in a second, our next webinar will be next week, same time, same place. That we'll be talking about the restaurant industry, which I think is going to be a big topic as well. So please join us again. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, especially if they're in that restaurant industry, and we hope to have another good webinar. And I will just open it up to any of the panelists if they had any closing comments to make.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
And Melissa and Jaswina, thank you very much. We know you're very busy. You're stressed probably because of all the stuff that's going on. So we doubly appreciate your willingness to come on. And I think it makes all the difference. This is really more about hearing from employers. Hopefully you notice the format. It's really more of a discussion. It's like having a pleasant conversation. That's what we wanted to do. And your insight was extremely helpful. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Okay. Melissa, we expect to see you in school.
Y'all take care, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right.